The humidity hit me the moment I stepped out of my car, that thick savanna air that clings to your skin like a secret you can't shake. August in Georgia doesn't forgive, and neither does memory. I smoothed my linen dress, navy blue, simple, elegant, and reminded myself that I was allowed to have dinner alone, that there was nothing pathetic about a woman of 60 treating herself to a Friday night at the Magnolia Room. I had been coming here for 40 years. 40 years of birthdays, anniversaries, graduations, 40 years of celebrations that had slowly thinned out until it was just me, a corner table, and a glass of Sancerre. The hostess, a young woman named Brianna, who had known me since she was bussing tables in high school, smiled warmly. "Mrs. Bennett, your usual table?" "Please," I said. "And Brianna, I'm in no rush tonight." She led me through the familiar maze of white tablecloths and candlelight. The Magnolia Room hadn't changed much since 1984. Same brass fixtures, same slow-turning ceiling fans, same oil paintings of the Savannah riverfront. The scent of magnolia and butter and old wood wrapped around me like a grandmother's arms. This place remembered who I used to be, a young wife, a new mother, a woman with a future so bright it hurt to look at directly. I settled into my chair and ordered the wine without looking at the menu. The waiter, Marcus, brought warm bread and honey butter, and for a moment I let myself believe this was enough. A quiet evening, good food, my own company. My phone sat silent in my purse. No calls, no texts. David had canceled our Saturday lunch, claiming he had an urgent report that couldn't wait. Chloe had begged off our Tuesday shopping trip. An unbearable migraine, she'd said, her voice thin and practiced over the phone. I told myself it was fine. Young people were busy. They had careers, obligations, lives that didn't revolve around their aging mothers. I told myself a lot of things. The bread was still warm when I heard the laugh. It wasn't a laugh I recognized at first. Too high, too performative. But something about it made me turn my head, and that's when my heart stopped. There, in the back corner of the restaurant, half hidden by a decorative palm, sat a table of 4. Richard was facing me, though he hadn't seen me yet, too busy swirling his whiskey and holding court the way he always did. His silver hair was perfectly styled. His suit probably cost more than my first car. Beside him, her hand resting on his arm like she owned him, sat Tiffany. 34 years old, blonde, and glittering with diamonds my alimony had probably paid for. But it wasn't Richard who made my hands go cold. It was David, my son, my only child, the boy I had rocked through fevers and nightmares and heartbreaks. He sat across from his father, looking relaxed, looking happy, in a way he never seemed to look around me anymore. And beside him, leaning in to whisper something that made Tiffany shriek with laughter, was Chloe. The migraine, the urgent report, lies. Both of them, lies. I should have left. Any sensible woman would have asked for the check, slipped out the side door, and cried in her car like civilized people do. But something kept me frozen in my chair, watching them through the palm fronds like a ghost haunting her own life. That's when I heard Chloe's voice, carrying just a little too loudly across the quiet restaurant. "I mean, honestly, Tiffany, she's just so boring. Every conversation is about the past. Remember when David was little? Remember when we used to do this? It's exhausting. You're so much more fun to be around." Tiffany preened, Richard smirked, and David, my David, said nothing. He just stared at his plate and let his wife mock me to the woman who had destroyed our family. I don't remember deciding to stand. I don't remember smoothing my dress or picking up my wine glass or beginning to walk. But suddenly I was moving, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor with a rhythm that sounded almost like a heartbeat. 8 years. 8 years since Richard sat me down in our living room, the living room I had decorated with furniture I had chosen in the house I had made a home, and told me he needed something more. 8 years since I discovered something more was a woman younger than some of my good china. 8 years of rebuilding myself brick by brick, while everyone whispered about how well I was handling it, how graceful I was in my abandonment. Graceful. as if I had a choice, as if falling apart was ever an option when you have a son who still needs you, bills that still need paying, a life that still needs living. I had protected David from the worst of it. He was 30 when the divorce happened, old enough to understand but young enough to still need his father's approval. I never asked him to choose sides. I never told him about the affair, the lies, the way Richard had tried to hide assets with Patricia's help. I never told him the darkest secret of all, that when David was 6 months old, his father had wanted to walk away entirely. I had buried that truth to protect my son. And now, here was my reward, watching him sit silent while his wife called me boring. The table grew quiet as I approached. Chloe saw me first. Her face cycled through surprise, panic, and then a plastic smile so fake it could have been sold on QVC. Richard's whiskey glass froze halfway to his lips. Tiffany's diamonds caught the light as she straightened in her chair, suddenly uncertain. And David, my David. He looked at me with the expression of a child caught stealing cookies, except the child was 38 years old, and the cookies were my dignity. I stopped at the edge of their table. The silence was deafening, thick enough to cut with the butter knife Chloe was clutching. I smiled. "What a wonderful coincidence," I said, my voice steady as stone. "That migraine cleared up fast, didn't it, Chloe? And David, sweetheart, the report must have written itself." I let the silence hang for a moment, savoring the panic in their eyes like the first sip of a good wine. Then I turned to my ex-husband, and 30 years of patience finally found its edge. "Richard," I said, letting his name roll off my tongue like something slightly spoiled. "I hope the dinner is excellent. The Magnolia Room has always known how to treat loyal customers." He set down his whiskey with a little too much care, the way a man does when he's trying to look unbothered and failing miserably. "Martha, this is unexpected. Isn't it?" I turned to the waiter who had materialized beside me, a young man with nervous eyes who clearly sensed he had walked into something far above his pay grade. "Excuse me, I'd like to send a bottle to this table. The 2015 Chateau Margaux, please, and put it on my son's tab." David's face went white. "Mom." "Oh, don't worry, sweetheart. I know you're good for it." I patted his shoulder the way I used to when he was small and had done something naughty. "After all, I'm the one who pays your credit card bill every month. Consider this my treat." Chloe's plastic smile had curdled into something closer to vinegar. "Martha, we were just having a lovely family dinner. I can see that." I gestured at the table, at the empty chair that might as well have had my name carved into it. "All of you together. How nice that everyone's health improved so dramatically. It's almost miraculous." Tiffany shifted in her seat, her diamonds catching the candlelight like little warning flares. She was trying to decide how to play this. I could see the calculation behind her eyes, the social arithmetic of a woman who had built her entire life on knowing which way the power was flowing. "Martha," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness so artificial it could cause cavities. "You're welcome to join us. We were just talking about the charity gala next month. Richard's firm is sponsoring the Henderson Foundation event." "Yes, I know." I smiled at her, the kind of smile Southern women have perfected over generations, warm on the surface, cold enough to freeze whiskey underneath. "I've been on their board for 15 years, but thank you for the invitation to my own event." Richard cleared his throat. "Martha, let's not make a scene." "A scene?" I tilted my head, genuinely curious. "Richard, when have I ever made a scene? In 32 years of marriage, did I make a scene when I found lipstick on your collar? Did I make a scene when you forgot David's 8th birthday because you were working late? Did I make a scene when I discovered you'd been sleeping with your event planner for 3 years?" The table had gone so quiet I could hear the ice shifting in Tiffany's water glass. I hadn't meant to go there. Not tonight, not like this. But some doors, once opened, refused to close. I still remember the night he told me. November 14th, 8 years ago. The house smelled like the pot roast I'd made for dinner, his favorite because I was always making his favorites, always trying to be enough for a man who had already decided I wasn't. He sat me down on the cream-colored sofa, the one we'd picked out together in 1995. His hands were folded like he was about to deliver a business presentation, and in a way, I suppose he was. "I've met someone," he said. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I've made a mistake." Just, "I've met someone," as if love was a scheduling conflict. The pot roast went cold on the stove. The candles I'd lit burned down to nothing while he explained, in that calm, reasonable voice he used in boardrooms, that he needed something more. That Tiffany made him feel alive again. That he hoped we could handle this like adults. I sat there on that cream-colored sofa and felt 32 years of my life reclassify themselves as a rough draft. Every sacrifice I'd made, every dream I'd deferred, every time I'd chosen his comfort over my own, all of it rewritten as the boring prologue to his real story. The worst part? I didn't cry. Not in front of him. I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, the perfect picture of grace under pressure, and told him I understood, that I wanted him to be happy, that we would figure out the details. He looked relieved. He actually looked relieved. Like I just approved a budget proposal instead of signing off on the demolition of my entire life. I cried later, alone in the bathroom with the shower running so David wouldn't hear. I cried until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen and there was nothing left inside me but a quiet, patient fury that would take 8 years to find its voice. Tonight, that voice had arrived. I looked at Richard now, at the silver hair and the expensive suit and the carefully maintained tan, and I saw him clearly for perhaps the first time. Not a villain, just a small man who had spent his whole life running from anything that required him to be brave. "Enjoy your dinner," I said, my voice pleasant as sweet tea. "And Richard, I'd take a careful look at your lease renewal next month. Commercial real estate in downtown Savannah can be so unpredictable." Something flickered across his face, not understanding, not yet, but the beginning of unease. The sense that he had missed something important, something that might cost him. Good. Let him wonder. I turned to David, and this was the hardest part. Looking at my son's face, seeing the shame and the fear and the desperate hope that I might somehow make this okay for him, the way I'd always made everything okay. "David," I said softly, "we'll talk tomorrow. But tonight I want you to think very carefully about which table you want to sit at. Because, sweetheart, I've spent 38 years saving you a chair at mine. I won't do it forever." I walked away before he could answer, before any of them could say a word. My heels clicked against the hardwood with the same steady rhythm, and I kept my spine straight and my chin high all the way through the restaurant, past Brianna's concerned face, out into the thick August night. The humidity wrapped around me like a living thing. I made it to my car, a sensible Lexus, silver, parked beneath a streetlight, before my hands started to shake. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, watching the restaurant's windows glow gold against the darkness. Somewhere in there, my son was deciding who he loved more. Somewhere in there, my ex-husband was wondering what I meant about his lease. And somewhere deep inside me, in a place I had kept locked for 8 long years, a door was finally swinging open. Richard had looked scared when I mentioned the real estate. Genuinely scared in a way I hadn't seen since the divorce lawyers started asking about his hidden accounts. What did he think I knew? More importantly, what didn't he know about me? I started the car, pulled out of the parking lot, and began the drive home. Tomorrow would bring David and his excuses, his explanations, his desperate attempts to play both sides. But tonight, I had preparations to make. I woke at 5:30, the way I always do. The old house creaked and settled around me like a living thing, the way Victorian homes do when they've stood for 140 years and seen everything there is to see. I lay in bed for a moment, watching the early light filter through the lace curtains, and I let myself feel the weight of what was coming. Then I got up and made coffee. The kitchen was my favorite room in this house. Original heart pine floors, a farmhouse sink I'd had restored, copper pots hanging above the island that had belonged to my grandmother. The coffee maker gurgled and hissed, filling the room with that dark, bitter scent that had started every morning of my adult life. I added cream, no sugar, and carried my cup to the sunroom where the light was best. My mother's orchids still bloomed on the windowsill. She'd been dead for 12 years, but I kept them alive out of stubbornness as much as sentiment. Eleanor Harwood had been a woman who believed in two things: the importance of documentation and the foolishness of trusting men with money. She'd left me more than orchids when she passed. I was on my second cup when the doorbell rang. 8:15, earlier than I expected. David must have spent the whole night panicking. I smoothed my blouse, checked my reflection in the hallway mirror, and opened the door. My son stood on the porch, holding a bouquet of pink roses, my favorite, a detail he only remembered when he was in trouble. His eyes were red-rimmed, his shirt wrinkled like he'd slept in it. Behind him, the azaleas were blooming in violent shades of fuchsia, and a mockingbird was singing somewhere in the magnolia tree. "Mom." His voice cracked on the single syllable. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside without a word and led him to the living room. "Before you say anything," David started, settling onto the edge of the settee like he might need to flee at any moment, "I need you to understand." "Coffee?" I interrupted, already pouring from the carafe I'd prepared. "You look like you need it." "Mom, please, just let me explain." I handed him the cup and sat down across from him in my mother's wingback chair. The morning light fell across the Persian rug between us, illuminating decades of wear and memory. "Explain," I said. "I'm listening." He took a breath, and I watched him assemble his lies like a child stacking blocks. "Last night, it wasn't what it looked like. Chloe and we've been trying to manage things. Dad's been pressuring me about the inheritance, and Tiffany's been pushing him to include conditions, and we thought if we just played both sides," I offered. He flinched. "It's not that simple." "Isn't it?" I set my coffee down on the side table, next to a photograph of David at his college graduation, young, hopeful, holding a diploma I'd paid for. "Let me tell you what I know, David. Then you can decide how much more you want to lie to me." The color drained from his face. "I know about the dinners. Not just last night. I know about the monthly dinners you and Chloe have been having with your father and Tiffany since March. The Magnolia Room, the third Saturday, the private room in the back. Did you think I wouldn't notice? I've known the manager there since before you were born." His mouth opened, but nothing came out. "I also know about the plan." I kept my voice even, almost conversational, the way my mother used to when she was about to deliver a devastating truth. The one where you formally distance yourself from me at Thanksgiving, where you choose Richard's side publicly to prove your loyalty, where I get quietly erased from family photos so Tiffany can pretend she's been there all along. "How?" "You left a receipt in your jacket pocket, David, 3 months ago when you asked me to have it dry cleaned. A receipt from the Magnolia Room, dated the same Saturday you told me you had a work conference in Atlanta. I remembered finding it, that thin slip of paper that smelled faintly of my son's cologne. 4 entrees, 3 bottles of wine, a private dining room charge. I'd stood in my laundry room for 10 minutes, holding it like a grenade with the pin pulled. I didn't want to believe it at first," I continued. "So I did what your grandmother taught me to do. I started paying attention. I started documenting." David set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. "Mom, I was trying to protect us. Dad's new will. He's threatening to leave everything to Tiffany if you don't what? Pretend I don't exist?" I leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, David, how much is your mother worth? What's the going rate for my erasure?" "It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" For the first time, I let an edge creep into my voice. "Because from where I'm sitting, It looks like my son has been taking my money with one hand while planning to discard me with the other. Your money? I almost laughed at the genuine confusion on his face. He really didn't know. After all these years, he really had no idea. David, who do you think pays your mortgage? He blinked. Dad set up an account. Your father set up an account that ran dry 18 months ago. Who do you think has been funding it since then? I rose and walked to the antique secretary desk in the corner, pulling out a folder I'd prepared that morning. Who pays for Chloe's car? Who covers your credit cards when they mysteriously exceed their limits every quarter? Who paid off your student loans 5 years early? I dropped the folder in his lap. Bank statements, transfer records, payment confirmations, 12 years of financial support, meticulously documented. David's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. I thought? Dad said Your father says a lot of things. He's very good at taking credit for other people's work. It's how he built his entire career. I returned to my chair. But that's not even the most important thing you don't know. He looked up at me, and I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who came to me with scraped knees and broken toys, trusting that I could fix anything. There's a trust, I said. Your grandmother's trust. She left it for you, but she left me in control of it. Do you understand what that means? How much? His voice was barely a whisper. Enough to make your father's inheritance look like pocket change. Enough to change your entire life. I paused, letting the weight of it settle. And I'm the one who decides if you ever see a penny of it. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed the half-hour. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed. David sat frozen in the morning light, clutching the evidence of his dependence like a life raft. Mom, he said slowly, why didn't you ever tell me any of this? Because I was protecting you, the same way I've always protected you. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street where I'd watched him ride his first bicycle, where I'd waved goodbye when he left for college. But there's something else I've protected you from, David. Something about your father that I've never told anyone. What? I turned to face him, and for a moment I saw Richard in his features, the same jaw, the same nervous habit of rubbing his thumb against his palm. When you were 6 months old, I said quietly, your father tried to leave us, not just me, us. He had a lawyer draw up papers. He was going to relinquish his parental rights and disappear. David's face went gray. I talked him out of it. I buried those papers and I never spoke of it again because I wanted you to have a father, because I thought you deserved that, even if I didn't. I crossed back to my chair and sat down, suddenly exhausted. But I kept the documents. I keep everything, David. Your grandmother taught me that. The roses lay forgotten on the settee, their pink petals already beginning to wilt. Now, I said, would you like to tell me again how your father's inheritance is worth more than 38 years of my sacrifice? The silence stretched between us like a held breath. David sat motionless on the settee, the folder of bank statements sliding from his lap onto the Persian rug. His face had gone from gray to something almost green, the color of a man watching his entire understanding of the world collapse. That's not true, he finally said, but his voice had no conviction. Dad wouldn't. He loves me. He's always what, David? I kept my voice gentle, the way you speak to someone in shock. Shown up for your birthdays? Attended your graduation? Walked you through your first heartbreak? I shook my head slowly. I was there for all of those things. Your father sent checks and excuses. But he stayed. He didn't leave, because I begged him not to. The words tasted like ash, old and bitter. I got down on my knees in our bedroom, David. I was 23 years old, with a baby I couldn't afford to raise alone, and I begged your father to stay. I promised I would be better, do more, ask for less. I promised him everything I had. David's eyes were wet now. Why? Why would you do that? Because I loved you more than I loved my pride, more than I loved myself. I reached over and picked up the fallen folder, setting it neatly on the side table. And because I believed, foolishly perhaps, that he would grow into the father you deserved, that if I just gave him enough time, enough grace, enough cover, he would become the man I'd married. And he didn't. No, he didn't. I smoothed my skirt, a nervous habit I'd never been able to break. He stayed, but he was never really there. And when he finally found an excuse to leave, when Tiffany came along and made him feel young again, he took it without looking back. David wiped his face with the back of his hand, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. He'd done the same thing as a boy whenever he was trying not to cry. "The papers," he said hoarsely. "The ones where he—" "Do you still have them?" "I have everything. Can I see them?" I hesitated. This was the moment I dreaded for 38 years, the moment when protection became revelation, when shielding became exposure. But David was a grown man now, sitting in my living room, finally asking for the truth. "Yes," I said, "when you're ready." The doorbell rang like a gunshot. David flinched. I didn't. I'd been expecting this, not the exact timing, but the general shape of it. Chloe would have called for reinforcements the moment David left this morning. And there was only one person in Richard's orbit who would drive across town at 9 in the morning to fight his battles for him. "Stay here," I told David, and walked to the front door. Patricia Ashford stood on my porch in a St. John suit the color of dried blood, her silver hair helmet sprayed into submission. She was 67 years old and had spent every one of those years believing that money and social standing could excuse any behavior. Behind her, parked crookedly against the curb, sat her cream-colored Cadillac. Martha. She didn't wait for an invitation, just pushed past me into the foyer. "We need to talk about what happened last night. You've upset Richard terribly, and—" "Patricia." I closed the door with a soft click. "How lovely. I was wondering when you'd slither over." Her eyes narrowed. We'd never liked each other, Patricia and I. She'd made it clear from the beginning that I wasn't good enough for her baby brother, and I'd made it clear that I didn't care. But we'd maintained a cordial détente for 30 years, a fragile peace built on family dinners and forced smiles. That peace ended last night. "Don't be crude, Martha. It doesn't suit you." She swept into the living room and stopped short when she saw David, red-eyed and rumpled on the settee. "David, darling, are you all right? Chloe called me in hysterics this morning." "Aunt Patricia." His voice was flat. "Did you know about Dad wanting to leave when I was a baby?" The flicker of panic across her face was almost imperceptible. But I'd been watching Patricia Ashford for 3 decades. I knew every tell. "I don't know what your mother has been filling your head with," she said, recovering quickly. "But Richard has always adored you. She's just trying to turn you against your father because she's bitter about the divorce." "Patricia." I stepped into the room, positioning myself between her and my son. "Let's not play games. We both know you've spent the last 8 years helping Richard hide assets, feed information to Tiffany, and slowly poison my son against me. We both know you were at every one of those secret dinners, whispering in everyone's ear about how difficult I am, how controlling, how I'm holding David back." Her face went rigid. "You can't prove any of that." "Can't I?" I walked to the secretary desk and pulled out a second folder, thicker than the first, older, with edges worn soft from handling. I'd started this collection before David was born, back when I first noticed discrepancies in Richard's stories, inconsistencies in his schedule. My mother had taught me well. A woman's best protection is a paper trail. "December 1997, I said, flipping open the folder. "You co-signed a lease for an apartment on East Liberty Street. Richard told me he was working late, but he was actually living there 3 nights a week with a woman named Sandra Chen. You knew. You helped him hide it." Patricia's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. "March 2004. You helped Richard open a brokerage account in the Cayman Islands. The same month he told me we couldn't afford to renovate the kitchen." I turned a page. August 2016. During our divorce proceedings, you provided a sworn statement claiming you had no knowledge of Richard's offshore holdings. I have emails that prove otherwise. Those emails were private. They were sent from your personal account to your brother's personal account. You should both learn to use BCC. I closed the folder and looked at her directly. Perjury is a serious offense, Patricia. So is conspiracy to commit fraud. I wonder what the Georgia Bar Association would think about your involvement in helping Richard hide assets from the court. The blood drained from Patricia's face. For the first time in 30 years, I saw something other than condescension in her eyes. Fear. You wouldn't, she breathed. Think of the scandal. Think of what it would do to the family. What family? I gestured around the room. The family that meets in secret to plan my exclusion? The family that teaches my son to lie to my face? The family that decided I was disposable? I shook my head. That's not a family, Patricia. That's a conspiracy, and conspiracies only work when everyone keeps their mouths shut. David stood up slowly, his eyes moving between me and his aunt. Aunt Patricia? Is it true? All of it? She couldn't look at him. That was answer enough. Get out of my house, I said quietly, and tell Richard to expect a call from my attorney. We're going to have a meeting next week, all of us, and this time I'll be the one setting the agenda. Patricia left without another word, her heels clicking a rapid retreat across my hardwood floors. The front door slammed behind her and the house settled back into silence. David sank back onto the settee, looking like a man who just survived a car accident. "Mom," he said, "what are you going to do?" I sat down across from him and folded my hands in my lap. "I'm going to show them what 30 years of patience looks like," I said. "And you're going to decide which side of the table you want to sit on." The law offices of Whitmore and Associates occupied the top floor of a restored antebellum building on Bull Street, with tall windows overlooking Forsyth Park. I'd been coming here for 23 years, ever since Rosalind Whitmore handled my mother's estate, and I realized I'd found the only lawyer in Savannah who was smarter than she was mean. I arrived 15 minutes early, as planned. Rosalind met me in the lobby, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in an elegant twist, her reading glasses perched on her nose like a weapon waiting to be deployed. "They're already here," she said, guiding me toward the conference room. "Richard brought his attorney, that young man from the Baker firm who thinks he's intimidating. Patricia's been pacing by the window. And Tiffany—" She paused, a smile playing at the corner of her mouth. "Tiffany wore diamonds to a legal meeting, at 10 in the morning. Of course she did. Your son is in the small conference room. He asked to speak with you before we begin." I shook my head. "Not yet. Let him wait with the others. I want him to see this." Rosalind nodded, approving. 30 years I've known you, Martha. I've never seen you like this." 30 years I've been waiting," I said. "A woman can only turn the other cheek so many times before she runs out of cheeks." We walked down the hallway together, our heels matching rhythm on the marble floor. Through the glass walls of the main conference room, I could see them arranged around the mahogany table like chess pieces waiting for the game to begin. Richard sat at the far end, trying to look commanding in his charcoal suit. His attorney, a boy barely out of law school with slicked hair and an expensive watch, sat beside him, shuffling papers importantly. Patricia had positioned herself by the window, arms crossed, her face set in that expression of aristocratic displeasure she'd perfected over 6 decades. Tiffany perched in a chair slightly behind Richard, her diamonds catching the morning light, looking like a woman who'd wandered into a board meeting expecting a cocktail party. And David. My David sat alone on the opposite side of the table, his chair pushed back slightly, as if he couldn't decide whether he was part of this group or merely observing it. I paused at the door, took a breath, let 30 years of patience settle into my bones. Then I walked in. "Good morning," I said, taking the seat at the head of the table, the one Richard had clearly expected to occupy. "Thank you all for coming. I promise not to waste your time." Richard's attorney started to speak, But Rosalind cut him off with a raised hand. Miss Bennet has prepared a presentation. I suggest we let her finish before anyone responds. This is ridiculous, Patricia muttered. We don't have to sit here and… Actually, Patricia, you do. Rosalind opened a folder and slid a document across the table. Unless you'd like me to forward these emails to the State Bar this afternoon instead of next month. Patricia went silent. I stood, smoothing my navy dress, and walked to the small screen Rosalind had set up at the front of the room. On the table before me sat 3 folders, color-coded, tabbed, organized with the precision my mother had drilled into me before I could write my own name. Richard, I began, do you know who owns the building where your marketing firm has operated for the past 12 years? He frowned. Atlantic Commercial Properties. We've leased from them since… Atlantic Commercial Properties is a subsidiary. I clicked to the first slide, a corporate structure diagram. A subsidiary of Harwood Holdings, LLC, which is a trust established by my mother, Eleanor Harwood, in 1987. I paused, letting the information settle. Harwood Holdings has 1 beneficiary and 1 controlling trustee. Me. The color drained from Richard's face. You've been paying rent to me for 5 years, Richard. Every month your check goes into an account I control. Your business, the one you've been so proud of, the one you've dangled over David's head like a prize, operates entirely at my discretion. Tiffany's hand flew to her mouth. That's not possible. Richard, you said you owned… I said the building was secure. Richard's voice had gone tight. I didn't say… You didn't say your ex-wife was your landlord? I smiled. No, I imagine that would have been awkward at dinner parties. Richard's attorney leaned forward. Mrs. Bennet, if you're implying some kind of impropriety… I'm not implying anything. I clicked to the next slide, a photograph of a signed document. I'm showing you an eviction notice. Effective 60 days from today, Bennet Marketing Associates will need to find new premises. The building is being converted to residential units. You can't do that. Richard stood, his chair scraping against the marble floor. I have a lease. You have a lease that expires in 90 days, with a renewal clause that requires mutual agreement. I don't agree. I set down the clicker and faced him directly. You've spent 8 years trying to erase me from this family, Richard. You've turned my son into a liar. You've conspired with your sister to cheat me, and you've let your new wife mock me at my own charity events. Did you really think I was just going to sit quietly and take it? The room had gone deadly silent. Patricia stared at the eviction notice like it might burst into flames. Tiffany's diamonds suddenly looked less like victory and more like the bars of a very expensive cage. Richard's attorney was furiously texting under the table, probably searching for a way out that didn't exist. And David sat frozen, watching his father's empire crumble in real time. But I'm not finished, I continued, returning to my folders. Patricia, would you like to explain to everyone how you helped Richard open offshore accounts during our marriage? Or should I read the emails aloud? Martha, please. Tiffany, would you like to discuss the prenuptial agreement you signed, the one that leaves you with almost nothing if Richard's business fails? Because I have a copy, and I've had my accountant review it. The liquidation clause is particularly interesting. Tiffany turned to Richard, her face a mask of dawning horror. You told me the business was solid. You told me… I told you what I thought was true. You told her what you wanted her to believe. I let the words hang in the air. The same thing you told me for 32 years, the same thing you've been telling David his entire life. The table erupted. Richard shouted at Patricia. Tiffany shouted at Richard. Patricia tried to defend herself while simultaneously reaching for the email printouts Rosalind had spread across the table. Richard's attorney had given up texting and was now openly searching for the exit. I let them tear at each other for a full minute. Then I raised my hand and Rosalind called the room to order with a sharp rap of her pen against the table. David. My son looked up at me, his eyes red, his hands trembling. I'm not doing this to punish you, I said quietly. so only he could hear over the chaos. I'm doing this because you deserve to know who these people really are, who your father really is, and who I've been protecting you from your entire life. I slid a document across the table to him, the final piece. This is the parental rights relinquishment form your father signed when you were 6 months old. I talked him out of it. I've kept it hidden for 38 years because I wanted you to have a father, even a flawed one. I stepped back. Now you have the truth. All of it. David stared at the document, then at Richard, then back at me. You have a choice to make, I said. You can walk out of here with them, follow your father into whatever's left of his business, keep lying to yourself and to me, keep hoping Tiffany's connections will save you. I paused. Or you can come home. Not today, maybe. Not easily. But the door is open, David. It's always been open. I gathered my folders and nodded to Rosalind. We're finished here. Richard, your 60 days start tomorrow. I suggest you start packing. I walked toward the door without looking back. Behind me, I heard the shuffle of chairs, the murmur of panicked voices, the sound of a family built on lies, finally collapsing under its own weight. And then, footsteps. Quick, uncertain, but moving in my direction. Mom, wait. 6 months can change everything. I learned this when I was 22, pregnant and terrified, watching my whole life rearrange itself around a heartbeat I hadn't planned for. I learned it again at 52, signing divorce papers in a courthouse that smelled like floor wax and broken promises. And I learned it once more in the months after that meeting in Rosalind's office, watching the kingdom Richard had built on sand finally wash away. His business closed in October. The eviction was only part of it. Once word got out that Bennett Marketing was losing its downtown location, clients started asking questions. And when clients ask questions, they find answers. They found the offshore accounts. They found the years of creative bookkeeping. They found a man who had built his reputation on confidence and charm with nothing solid underneath. Tiffany left him 3 weeks after the office closed. I heard it from Brianna at the Magnolia Room, who heard it from her cousin who worked at the country club. Apparently, Tiffany had found a retired surgeon in Sea Island with a yacht and no ex-wives. The prenuptial agreement meant she walked away with her jewelry and not much else, but for a woman like Tiffany, that was enough to start over. I didn't gloat. There was no pleasure in watching Richard's life collapse, no satisfaction in seeing Tiffany's diamonds disappear into a moving truck. These were people I had loved once, in different ways and for different reasons. Their destruction wasn't my victory. My victory was simpler than that. My victory was peace. The old house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if it had been holding its breath for years and could finally exhale. I spent the fall mornings in the garden, coaxing the roses through their last bloom. I spent the afternoons in the sunroom with books I'd been meaning to read for decades. I had dinner with Rosalind once a week, and we talked about everything except the case. I joined a watercolor class at the community center, and I was terrible at it, and I didn't care. For the first time in 40 years, I was living a life that belonged only to me. But there was still an empty chair at my table. David came to see me on the first Sunday of December. I was in the kitchen, rolling out dough for the pecan pie I made every Christmas, when I heard his car pull into the driveway. I wiped my hands on my apron and waited. He looked different. Thinner, yes, but that wasn't it. There was something in his posture, in the way he held himself, that I hadn't seen since he was a young man, before Chloe, before the lies, before he learned to shrink himself to fit other people's expectations. He stood on my porch in a simple sweater and jeans, no flowers this time, no rehearsed excuses. "Mom," he said, "can we talk?" I led him to the kitchen and poured 2 cups of coffee. The dough could wait. Some things couldn't. "The divorce was finalized last week," he said, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. "Chloe got the house. I got the debt. It seemed fair." "I'm sorry." "Don't be." He almost smiled. It was the first honest thing I've done in years. We sat in silence for a moment, the old clock ticking on the wall, the winter light pale through the windows. I could smell the pecans I'd been toasting, sweet and warm. "I've been seeing a therapist," David continued. "Twice a week. We've been talking about everything. Dad, Chloe, the way I learned to lie to survive, the way I convinced myself it was normal." He looked down at his coffee. "The way I treated you. David, let me finish, please." He took a breath. "I've spent my whole life trying to earn Dad's approval, trying to be good enough, smart enough, successful enough for a man who was never going to love me the way I needed. And somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you. I stopped seeing everything you did, everything you sacrificed. I told myself you were fine, that you didn't need me, that I could take your love for granted because it would always be there." His voice cracked, and he pressed on anyway. "I was wrong. I was so wrong, Mom. And I know I can't fix it with an apology. I know words don't mean anything after what I did, but I'm asking, I'm begging for a chance to earn it back, not your trust. I know that's gone. But maybe we could start over, build something new." I set down my coffee and looked at my son. Really looked at him, the way I hadn't in years. I saw the lines around his eyes, the gray starting at his temples, the weight of everything he'd been carrying. I saw the boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard, who cried when his goldfish died, who held my hand at his grandmother's funeral. I saw a man who had finally stopped running. "I have conditions," I said. "Anything. You keep going to therapy. You take responsibility for your choices, not your father's, not Chloe's, yours. You don't lie to me, even when the truth is hard." I reached across the table and took his hand. "And you come to Christmas dinner. There's someone I want you to meet." A Christmas morning dawned cold and bright, the kind of winter day Savannah rarely sees, frost on the azaleas, breath visible in the air, the old house creaking with cold and memory. I'd been up since 5, preparing the feast I used to make when David was small: roast turkey, cornbread dressing, collard greens with ham hock, the pecan pie cooling on the counter. David arrived at noon, carrying a bottle of wine and someone else. She was 7 years old, with her father's dark hair and her grandmother's stubborn chin. Chloe had kept her away from me for years, feeding her stories about the difficult grandmother who didn't approve of anything. But children are smarter than we give them credit for. And when David finally told her the truth, all of it, in terms a 7-year-old could understand, she asked to meet me. Her name was Eleanor, after my mother. A detail I hadn't known, a gift Chloe had given me without meaning to. "Grandma?" She stood in my doorway, uncertain, clutching a handmade Christmas card. "Daddy said you make the best pecan pie in Georgia. Is that true?" I knelt down so I could look her in the eye. She had Eleanor's eyes, too, sharp, curious, missing nothing. "I don't know about all of Georgia," I said, "but I've been practicing for 60 years. Would you like to be the judge?" She smiled, and it was like watching the sun come out. We ate at the big dining table, the one that had sat empty for too many holidays. The turkey was perfect. The pie was better. Eleanor asked 1,000 questions about the old photographs on the walls, and David told her stories about growing up in this house. And for a few hours, the past released its grip and let us simply be. After dinner, while Eleanor explored the garden with a flashlight, looking for the cat that sometimes visited, David helped me wash the dishes. We worked in comfortable silence, the way my mother and I used to when I was young. Some things don't need words. "Mom," he said finally, drying the last plate. "Thank you for not giving up on me." I hung up the dish towel and looked out the window at my granddaughter, her flashlight bobbing through the winter darkness like a small, persistent star. "You're my son," I said. "I was never going to give up on you. I was just waiting for you to come home." He hugged me then, the first real hug in years, not the polite, distant embrace of obligation, but the desperate, grateful hold of a child who has finally found his way back. Outside, Eleanor shrieked with delight. She'd found the cat. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of a feast, holding my son while my granddaughter laughed in the garden, and I felt something I hadn't felt in decades: whole. They thought I was the one being left behind. The boring ex-wife, the disposable mother, the woman whose only purpose was to fade quietly into the background of their glittering new lives. But I was the one who decided who stays, and I was the one who set the table.